They put big boobs, big butt, submissiveness all in this really nice box, and they put a bow on it, and we really just, kind of change the wrapping paper.
It's way too influenced by what other people have to say.
I've never had a sex talk with my parents.
It's influenced by culture, it's influenced by religion, and then it's also influenced by gender.
There's been a lot of female empowerment that's been brought to light, and women are being painted as more successful and shattering the glass ceiling.
Entertainment media has been a constant in my life. Every TV show, every movie, every song I have ever heard has left a lasting impression on me in some manner. I remember idolizing entertainment media. Everybody I saw on TV, I wanted to be. Suffice to say that entertainment media has been my calling. It has influenced me throughout my life. It has socialized my manhood, and it has raised me to be who I am. Additionally, I argue that entertainment media has influenced everyone in some form. We are socialized to communicate in ways that reflect the entertainment we consume. As art often imitates reality, our reality has no choice but to embrace art. The things we see in media shape our understanding of reality. Those we see in media are often the basis for how we mold ourselves. They are the blueprint for who we become. All the above ring true to me. And while most of my heroes come from TV, there was always one that I saw daily in the real world, my mom. In watching her work hard to create opportunities for me, I recognized the difficulties that she faced. I'll never be able to repay her. I'll never be able to walk in her shoes, but I can still learn and improve and become a better man in the process. As any good son, I must concern myself with the issues that my mom has experienced. And as any good man, I must educate myself on the struggles that plague womanhood. Since reality often reflects art, I feel that much of the struggle women experience stems from their representation in media. Typically, women in media are seen as props or objects for the male desire. Largely, women have been over-sexualized. Even further, I have noticed that women in minority groups have been dehumanized and disenfranchised more than white women.
Shake up a batch of Aunt Jemimas, then pour the batter on the griddle.
The representation of women in media reinforces how they are treated in reality. However, recently, social movements led by women are aiming to counteract the mischaracterization of womanhood in media and culture. We are entering a zeitgeist where women are controlling their narrative. Nevertheless, an education on women's sexuality is still necessary. My pursuit of knowledge has brought a few research questions on the topic of women's sexuality and women's representation. How is sexuality performed across various experiences? What role does media play in the hypersexualization of womanhood? How does sexualization differ between white women and women in minority groups? And finally, how can the representation of women in media improve? Before I can answer these questions, I must understand the perspective of women. And as a man, it is not my job to define nor communicate the different experiences of womanhood and sexuality. Therefore, my interest led me to interviewing a few phenomenal women who sought to educate me on their experiences of womanhood, representation, and their defining of sexuality.
Sexuality is an individual expression that is on a spectrum, and that spectrum is influenced by worldview, it's influenced by culture, it's influenced by religion, and then it's also influenced by gender.
My understanding of sexuality is people who I am attracted to socially, emotionally, physically. That is my understanding of sexuality.
It is, in essence, to me, about doing what you want to do, doing what feels right to you, dressing how it feels right to you, presenting what feels right to you, like regardless of your gender expression.
As we do self-reflection, we say, okay, I identified this one way. This is how I feel about sex. This is how I feel about X, Y, and Z.
It's all very much whatever makes people comfortable, and it's way too influenced by what other people have to say.
So really it's a spectrum, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, so in my experience and from what I know is that sexualization really isn't talked about in the Chinese culture. Sex really isn't talked about at all. It's kind of seen as taboo.
My parents are both immigrants. They both came here when they were in their late teens or their 20s. So sexuality in the Philippines was a little touchier.
I think my first experience with sexuality would honestly probably have to be when I was like really young, just because I remember being sometimes treated differently than my male cousins.
Society would tell me all these things about what I needed to be and like how I needed to fit in, how my body needed to be, how I needed to be to appeal to men mostly.
And at the time, I didn't really know it was because of sexuality and I guess the nature around it in like Black families.
What my mom and the other women in my family told me was just to be a good person.
I think really like family is a huge part in how I know what I know now.
I probably got a little bit more comfortable with the topic around like middle school.
When I went to college, that's my first exposure to, hey, maybe this is something that we need to be addressing.
I kind of like stumbled through discovering my sexuality because I felt like more accepting of my own sexuality at a younger age than others, what I would consider.
I think a common phrase a lot of people hear is that girls are more mature than boys.
From a very young age, it was like, you can't wear a bikini. You can't do, you can't, for some reason, it was like you can't wear red nail polish because it's sex appeal. Red is a sexy color.
We as a society expect girls to be more mature than boys, and we put expectations and we put girls in situations where they are sexualized at an early age.
So even before I was like even practicing anything with like sexuality, it was always the elephant in the room.
Society teaches women that they shouldn't be sexual, they shouldn't be interested in things like sexuality and things like that, and it's like fast or like unbecoming to be a woman who's interested in those things or to talk about those things.
Fast is like basically a thought. Like they're basically saying like you a little thoughtler. Like
I have heard so many like mothers in churches and stuff just being like, I told you that little girl was fast. And I just want to say, is she though?
that's my understanding of it, is just like promiscuous and alluring to the male gaze.
I think especially in Western society, we view sexuality through a male gaze, a male lens, which the male gaze is basically how literature, media, TV, movies, radio are created by men. And there's no influence of a woman's perspective.
I think one of the biggest examples of the male gaze is a franchise that I do enjoy, but the Transformers movies. And how those movies are shot, particularly the first one, how we see Megan Fox, the objectification, the shots panning, showing her body in specific ways.
And so all portrayals of women is very much little outside of her sexual appeal or her advantageousness to a man in the story.
Men have always been the purveyors of media representation. Everything is seen from our perspective. We control the manners in which women are represented. We are in the positions of power. I have seen this firsthand.
What?
I have seen the dehumanization of womanhood in media. Due to the constant prioritization of the male perspective, women have been seen as survivors of the male desire. Their representation is one in which independence is non-existent. They're not seen as people with wants and needs of their own, rather objects for the purpose of satisfying the male gaze. The male gaze is a concept that fits into the overarching discourse regarding the objectification of women in media.
Objectification of women is just representing women like an object, like they really don't have a voice, they're powerless.
Objectification is basically a woman being used as a prop for her sexuality or her attachment to a man.
I'd probably describe it as the dehumanization of someone simply to like an object.
Because she has no other substance besides being an object or a prop.
Men have created this dialogue and what it means to be a woman for so long. And I believe like that's what objectification is when we see them in media and how they're portrayed.
Sexualizing women to me means making them sexual objects. So half naked, submissive to men in advertisements and in shows and in other entertainment.
Sex and sexuality is so deeply rooted in like every industry.
You'll have television shows or movies where for some reason the woman is always naked or she's finding a reason to be naked.
The media only even feeds two versions of a woman.
You should see me in the crowd.
And one is either sexy and alluring and probably at fault because of that. And the other is depicted as like a really sweet, wholesome girl.
One of the first things I think of is Star Wars, but you have Padme in like this full tight white outfit and she gets scratched by a creature and all of a sudden like half her shirt's missing. And I mean, was there any need for her to lose half her shirt?
In the past, you look at old media and a lot of women are very sexualized in how they dress.
I know a lot back in the day, it was like any woman who is depicted in a movie to be engaged with her own sexuality, for whatever reason, was just depicted as the movie's whore.
I think of really high-end brands, like mostly perfume brands or just those expensive brands that use attractive men and women in their advertisements, and they usually put the man in a position of power next to a woman who is kind of his submissive.
I remember the first time I saw a woman hold a football, she was in lingerie and she didn't have a helmet or any padding. And
so since the male gaze is dominant throughout movies and television and whatnot, I think that's where we begin to get socialized as this is how we view ourselves and our sexuality.
All of these ideas, all of these like pretty sexist and like misogynistic ideas that I was consuming from the internet and media and Family Guy, mostly.
Here's another one. Why do women have boobs? So you got something to look at while you're talking to them.
It gave me a lot of unhealthy ideas about like women.
The movies that we're going to see and the TV that we're watching and the books that we're reading are informing our general ideas. It's informing how we look at individuals.
I feel like it's just so stemmed in our culture.
Female bodies and female nudity is still seen as a very taboo topic in society. And maybe that's partly because of how they're currently looked at in entertainment. That's probably our preconceived notion of what female bodies are and what they're used for.
And a lady should be modest.
Yes, a lady should be modest.
And so that's when I think we begin to have that internalized feeling of, oh, this is how I'm supposed to look. This is how magazines present how I'm supposed to look, Instagram ads, because that's where our ideas come from.
Women are shunned. They are encouraged not to ask about their sexuality or to be interested in it or to pursue their sexuality at all.
Keep the one that you like best and then return the rest. For any one of us will bring a thrill so new.
Despite women sharing the brunt of objectification, their experiences are not monolithic. Throughout American history, Black women, Asian women, and Latinas have experienced a greater degree of marginalization than white women. In identifying as women in minority groups, they face double the prejudice in comparison. They are seen as fetishes rather than people. They are treated as subordinates to the yearns of male dominance.
So feel free to use me however you see fit.
Additionally, the abuses and inequality that they face go unnoticed. The media representation of women in minority groups reinforces the harmful notion that they are lesser than men as well as their white woman counterparts.
You can't have this conversation without thinking about the historical context.
The Black woman has always been, just historically, it's always just been known that a Black woman is kind of like a Jezebel. I feel like that's the narrative that was spun.
She's sweet brown sugar with a touch of spice.
If you see a man anywhere, send him in, because I do need a man.
And I think a lot of that has to begin when, you know, our ancestors were brought here as slaves.
And I feel like ever since then, it's just kind of been like carried.
You have these, you know, mammy tropes, you have these caretaker ideals, and that bleeds over into how white performers portrayed Black women in minstrel shows and vaudeville shows, which bled into radio shows and television.
If a Black woman is in tune with her sexuality, it's nearly impossible for her to do that and to be deemed as sexually liberated and opposed to being considered a whore.
Oh, she know what she doing with them low ass shorts on. She know we be looking.
I never want to say that one woman of a specific skin tone goes through worse things than another, because I only know my own experience with the skin tone I have.
One of the biggest things that we can look at is the fact that there really isn't a lot of Asian representation in Hollywood and in movies.
You don't see a whole lot of Asian American women in the media, which I think is kind of a problem.
And I think because of that, that already highlights that Asians are seen as foreigners still. They're seen as it feeds into the perpetual foreigner stereotypes where we'll always be seen as the other.
It is very unfair.
Usually Asians are not portrayed as main characters in movies. They're usually side characters, maybe someone in the background. They're usually portrayed as like the dragon lady, right? Like because they're exotic and they look a specific way.
My white friends don't really think about this stuff because they don't really have to.
Historically, how we're all treated is very differently.
White women are always portrayed in more of a sophisticated light.
White women are usually the lead actresses. Asian women have those stereotypical roles.
I think how women who are lighter are treated is different than how women who are darker are treated.
There definitely is a double standard when it comes to like white women and their sexual liberation and Black women.
Women of color are faced every day with extreme discrimination more than white women do in terms of like being overtly sexualized.
They really try and paint the narrative that any kind of sexual desire coming from a Black woman is enticing.
We get tropes like welfare queens and all these things, and when that's all you see in your entertainment, you begin to think, oh, that's what Black women are like.
I feel like it's way easier for a white woman to be sexually liberated without being considered fast, to make it full circle.
Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, where the main character is a male. He's white, he's a male. He goes into the Japanese culture and kind of looks at Japanese women in terms of a sexual object. And the movie portrays them in that way because they're not really wearing anything. They're there to support the guys when they're racing their cars.
One thing you have to look at is who's creating these shows, who is producing these shows.
The Asian fetish contributes a lot to why they're portrayed in that way. And I think that because they're portrayed in a stereotypical way in media, that's how they're seen in reality.
You look at people like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion.
Yeah, you dealing with some wet and gushy.
And I think it's way easier to, like I said, kind of demonize them and look at them because they have like more like voluptuousness and more, I guess, like sex appeal.
That's garbage. You don't need to be a Puritan to think so. It's garbage. It's aimed at young American girls.
Obviously, Black women are not monolithic. So it gets really tough when individuals treat us as if we are all the same. And when stereotypes and tropes become how Black women are supposed to act.
The negative portrayals and stereotypes of Asians and Asian females results in that message being spread to the rest of society that we will always be seen as foreigners.
But I think it's also kind of harmful that there aren't more shows and more advertisements and more media that are showing Asian American women, and to start with that would be a step in the right direction.
I would say how Black women are seen over time has evolved. I hope that it's evolving more towards getting more nuanced portrayals, more varied portrayals.
We're just now getting to the point where we're even seeing Black bodies in movies, just not about them being Black.
I want every woman to be able to see themselves in something and think, you're not making fun of me. This is not a stereotype. This is authentic.
We cannot discount the progress of women's representation. In recent years, we have seen women fight for power on a social and artistic level. The representation of womanhood is undergoing a shift, where women are controlling their narratives by subjectifying their livelihoods and the experiences attached to them. No further should women be identified as objects for the male gaze. Women are to be seen as how they want to be seen, subjects of their own inclinations.
Subjectification is kind of how females are able to create their own dialogue and create their own meanings.
Subjectification may be reclaiming these outlines that society has given women to be or not to be and putting themselves where they want.
Treating them like a human and like someone who deserves respect physically and emotionally.
Kind of like a counter narrative where they're able to take this narrative that they believe and they perceive of themselves, and they kind of try to make a voice for themselves and for the rest of women in society.
It's about letting women feel comfortable enough to be themselves.
It's a way to empower women, and I think that's the main difference.
Subjectification shows a certain level of cognitive awareness of what's going on in society.
Females are able to use their own voices and use their own platforms to create an image of what being a woman is.
For the most part, it's been very helpful. And you can see a lot of companies sort of leaning more toward that than leaning the other way toward objectifying women.
Having women as directors and producers can be really empowering as well.
You have campaigns by Dove that tell women to be real and to be the best person that they can be.
I think the Free the Knit movement is like a genuine way to take our power back. I think that's a good movement.
Brands like Aerie who show all types of women with disabilities and different backgrounds and race.
I think in all of these conversations, there needs to be room for nuance.
A lot of the times today, specifically in the music industry, we think we're taking our power back by objectifying ourselves.
There also needs to be room for individual feelings.
If we're genuinely doing this for us, and I think it should match. And I think definitely with industries like music and even film, sometimes it's like it's really hard to see the two ends meet.
There are some women who feel empowered and freed by nudity, and then there's some women who don't. There's some women who think you should dress more modestly or conservatively.
I can be a sexual being, but I can also be smart and funny and have a personality and have likes and dislikes and family members just like you.
There is no right or wrong way to be a woman, to dress and feel. It's what makes her feel comfortable.
I think for women to completely conquer subjectification, we have to change what defines our sexuality and our sexiness and our ability to be both sexy and smart.
As a principle, subjectification is sparking philosophical muses regarding women's sexuality. In learning about subjectification, I have a deeper understanding of the role that men take in women's representation. How are women to achieve full independence from the male perspective if the structures being used are inherently male-born? The answer does not lie with me. It lies in women. The path toward equity in media representation starts with engaging the concepts that build our understanding of society and culture. And while it is a complex concept, subjectification is paving the way toward prosperity in women's representation. As a counter-narrative, subjectification encourages dialogue and discourse regarding the characterization of womanhood. It affords primacy to the woman's perspective. And personally, I'm in favor of embracing such presentation.
As time goes on, as females start reclaiming their voices, I think that the representations are getting, there's an improvement there, but we can always do better.
I think we have so much more work to do than we think we do.
I think that right now, a lot of the directors and producers are male, so we see it from their perspective and how they view women.
So instead of being written by women of color, by trans women, by people, by non-binary people, by people who kind of fall in between other people of color, indigenous people, they're almost being characterized by people who don't share those experiences, and that's why they're being portrayed in such a way that feels fake.
Recently, we've seen Crazy Rich Asians that just came out, which is an all-Asian cast, which is great, but maybe we can do better than that because the director and the producer of it was an Asian man.
And speaking with my friends and colleagues, I have been enlightened. My pursuit of knowledge brought me to a better understanding of women, as well as their representation in media. No longer should they be identified as props or objects, but phenomenally, they are seen as women. Despite writing, editing, and directing this documentary, it is not my intention to control nor dictate the portrayal and understanding of womanhood. My goal in this project was to educate. Furthermore, myself nor my friends are seeking to man-hate. We are not seeking to further divide the sexes with our critical discourse. We just want to see more. We deserve better as a culture. We just want the representation of women in media to be better. Media representation should reflect a narrative in which women are seen how they desire. To any man watching this, it is our time to step aside. Let women tell their stories. Let them create. Let them own their spaces. And to do this, we as men should revoke the ownership of their sexuality. Who are we to tell the stories of womanhood? Who are we to construct narratives surrounding their representation? As men, we are often fixed on notions of control. It is time we concede. In the end, I hope we progress toward a future in which the portrayal of womanhood in media is authentic. We can counteract objectification. We can counteract dehumanization. We can counteract the mischaracterization of women in media. It starts with listening.
You can kind of tell that the narrative is shifting a little with the Oscars this year and how there are 2 female-nominated directors, which is huge. But I think we need to keep going with that and keep that momentum going.
I would like to see a world where more women are given the opportunity to tell the stories that they want to tell and then show their life.
I think that those stories make women feel more empowered to be themselves instead of being the sexual object that is there for a man.
It would be really cool to see a lot of women put out art that didn't cater to any male gaze whatsoever. Like, at all.
So I want women in the position of power to create this dialogue and to be able to speak up for other women so that we're not just hearing the voices of men trying to dictate this is what a woman should look like.
Also, if you're talking about sexuality, not to forget those women who are not heterosexual. You need to look at those who are lesbian and identify as queer or bisexual and not to just disregard them because those are all people that also identify as female or as a woman.
Allow these people who have been historically marginalized to come forward and tell their stories via media.
And then also be able to listen, be able to not just have rooms where it's just women or just men, but mixed rooms.
Then we can fully understand what the vast amount of experiences that people have and that we have been silencing for so many years.
There's a lot more that needs to be done to reclaim voices for females and women in media.
Women are not monolithic. Black people are not monolithic. No one is monolithic.
But I think that if we just stay like optimistic and just know that maybe one day we can get there and have women, be empowered and take these actions and take on these roles, I think will be really helpful.
Just because my experience may be different from yours is still 100% valid. No one can take that from you. Just like mine is still 100% valid. No one can take that from me, even if they contradict each other. We contain multitudes. So be it.